Public forum debate is a two-on-two debate about a current events topic, typically involving a cost-benefit analysis on some policy option. In the sample debate you're about to see, the policy question is about the use of anti-missile defense systems and whether they are in the best interests of South Korea. In a public forum debate, there are 4 sets of speeches with a few crossfires in between. Each team will have a constructive to lay out their best arguments, a rebuttal to answer the other side, a summary to pick out the key issues of the debate, and a final focus to explain the reason that you, the judge, would vote for one side or the other. Throughout the debate, each team also has 2 minutes of prep time to use at their disposal. Judges flow the debate, writing down in columns rather than across the page so you can line up competing claims. You vote on the best explanation of why their side does what the topic asks, not on who sounds better or on your favorite point made throughout the debate, or counting up sources or other ways of evaluating the debate other than on the arguments made by the debaters. You vote only on how convincingly they make the case for the arguments that they tell you are the most important arguments at the end of the debate.
We affirm that deployment of anti-missile systems is in South Korea's best interest. Contention 1 is stopping missiles. A conflict with North Korea is reasonably likely for 2 reasons. First, an American preemptive strike. Sanger of the New York Times writes in 2017 that the U.S. will never allow North Korea to develop a missile capable of delivering a nuke to the mainland U.S. However, the Washington Post reports that North Korea will achieve this capability in early 2018. Unfortunately, CNN's Collinson finds in 2017 that the U.S. might launch a preemptive attack to prevent this from happening. In fact, Lay of Daiwa Research estimates in 2017 that there is a 20% chance the U.S. will strike first. Rich of the New York Times notes in 2017 that any preemptive strike would result in nuclear retaliation against South Korea since the U.S. is out of range. Second, a South Korean preemptive strike. Gomez of the Cato Institute reports in 2016 that South Korea is rapidly developing preemptive strike capabilities to hit North Korea if they think an attack is likely. Kelly of Pusan University explains in 2015 that as North Korea continues to develop nuclear weapons, pressure on South Korean leaders to take preemptive action will rise. Crucially, Kelly notes, without missile defense, South Korea's leaders would feel so paranoid that they would likely strike first. For these reasons, Chang of CNBC estimates in 2017 that as of now, there is a 35% chance of war breaking out. Fortunately, anti-missile systems shoot down missiles. Ellman of the International Institute for Strategic Studies explains in 2016 that South Korea's multi-layered missile defense system is so effective that in 90% of cases, not a single missile could get through. Critically, Sejong Institute's Daewoo finds in 2017 that just shooting down a single missile would save around 340,000 lives. Contention 2 is affirming the alliance. Halting the deployment of missile defense creates the dangerous perception of a weakening alliance between South Korea and the United States, thus undermining South Korea's security interests in the region. As Kuo of The Diplomat writes in 2017, the potential withdrawal of the Terminal High-Altitude Air Defense, or THAAD, anti-missile system would send a powerful yet undesirable message about South Korea's security policy and prioritization of alliances. THAAD symbolizes the joint U.S.-South Korean resolve against a shared adversary. Removing this symbol would send the message that the alliance is no longer at the forefront of East Asian security. Sending this signal has 2 impacts. First, an upset United States. Jeong Ju of the Korea Times writes in 2017 that suspending THAAD will make Washington uneasy about South Korea's intentions to keep its security agreement, prompting the U.S. to begin to back off from the alliance. This would undermine South Korea's strategic objectives in the region regarding North Korea. As Lee of Voice of America notes in 2017, that a weaker alliance would be a signal to China, Russia, and even Japan that South Korean foreign policy is close to incoherent, eroding the ability to get these actors to work together to solve the North Korean problem. The second impact is emboldening North Korea. Kim of the Center for Strategic and International Studies writes that the strength of South Korea's alliance with the United States is responsible for keeping the peace on the peninsula today, discouraging North Korea from taking any sort of military action because of the strength of the American military. However, a perceptually weaker South Korean and American alliance would change Pyongyang's decision-making calculus, making them think the United States would no longer be committed enough to help South Korea in the event of a conflict. Indeed, Singer of the New America Foundation finds in 2012 that in the past, North Korea has responded to what it perceived to be weakness of the alliance with violent acts of aggression, meaning not deploying THAAD could result in new North Korean aggression against the South. Thus, we affirm.
Is everyone ready? Okay. We negate the resolution. The deployment of anti-ballistic missile systems is in the best interest of South Korea. We observe that the resolution uses the word is, making it present tense. The only way to evaluate impacts in the present tense is to look at past events. So we must look at the anti-missile system which has already been deployed, THAAD. Contention 1 is emboldening Kim through Chinese and Russian support. Roland Oliphant of The Telegraph reports in May of this year that Vladimir Putin has warned against attempting to intimidate North Korea and that they blame U.S. policy for provoking the crisis. Getting the U.S. involved even more accelerates their retaliatory actions. Nishka Chandran of CNBC claims in May, after the deployment of THAAD, that Russia made sincere attempts at building a partnership with North Korea. In fact, the SCMP finds in June of this year that Russian exports to North Korea have increased by 149.1%. Eleanor Albert of the Foreign Council Relations reports in 2017 that China and North Korea trade was up by 37.4%. In fact, China provides North Korea with most of its food and energy supplies and accounts for about 90% of its trade. Both of these increases occurred immediately after the U.S. deployment of THAAD missiles in North Korea. Increased support from these two countries signals to Kim Jong-un that his practices of preferring the military over his own people serves as a justification for him to continue these practices. The impact is that these cruelties create a refugee crisis in South Korea, draining the nation's resources. The Asian Institute for Policy Studies in 2014 writes, there were 26,483 North Korean refugees living in South Korea as of March of 2014, 40% of them being children and young adults aged 10 to 29. According to recent studies, young North Korean refugees face challenges that are different from adults, such as gaps in physical health and socioeconomic status, psychological health issues such as PTSD, and bias towards the North Korean refugees that are widely prevalent in schools and workplaces. Such obstacles translate to steep school dropout rates and high youth unemployment rates compared to their local peers, which dramatically decrease their chance of successful resettlement. However, policies currently in place do not address these concerns but are primarily geared towards providing short-term economic assistance and social services. We propose that the government take long-term, multi-generational approach to solving social and health issues among the young North Korean refugees and put more emphasis on addressing the latent biases and prejudices against them in the South Korean society. Contention 2 is China. The deployment of THAAD angers China for two reasons. First, as Reels of CNBC News explains in May, China believes that that THAAD's advanced radar system gives the U.S. military the ability to peer into China's airspace and track the movement of Chinese military hardware on the ground. Second, Park of the Council on Foreign Relations finds that Beijing sees a more insidious motive behind the U.S. push to deploy THAAD, containment of China with a regional missile defense network, and increased U.S.-Japan ROK security cooperation. Beijing fears that a regional missile defense network could provide a shield for U.S. assets in the region, allowing the U.S. to threaten China more easily. Thus, China has no option but to retaliate, harming South Korea in two ways. First, economically. Seema Modi of CNBC reports in April that in response to South Korea's decision to continue with their deployment of THAADs, despite Chinese opposition, China has been alleging code violations against South Korean firms. Specifically, Beijing began impeding tourist travel from China to South Korea. Scott Seaman of the Eurasia Group notes in April that estimates suggest that Beijing's travel ban could reduce the number of Chinese visitors to South Korea by up to 70%, resulting in billions of dollars lost in tourism-related revenues. If South Korea does not comply, China will just make harsher policies like sanctions on the auto or tech industries. In fact, Rena Barnes reports that China's travel ban can shave at least 20% off of Korea's GDP growth this year. Second, militarily. Xinhua, the official Chinese news agency, warns that THAAD will bring an arms race in in the region, likening the defense system to a shield that would prompt the development of new spheres. Gary Moloney of the New York Times furthers in March that the deployment of THAAD could prompt China to accelerate efforts in modernizing its nuclear arsenal as well as other weapons. This is problematic for South Korea, as Collier of the University of Oxford concluded that there is an arms race multiplier, finding that an increase in military expenditure in one country leads its neighbors to almost double their spending. Essentially, if China were to further their militarization, other countries like Japan, Vietnam, and even South Korea itself would naturally follow. The Harvard International Review furthers in February that THAAD deployment may be the beginning of further militarization of the Korean Peninsula and could lead to broader instability in East Asia. Ultimately, writer of Texas Tech concludes that an arms race increases the probability of war by 331%. Thus, we proudly negate.
Okay, so you need to cut down before cross.
Okay. Is everyone ready? Okay. Do you agree that the most important impacts in this round should be related to like the likelihood of war breaking out?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a question?
Okay. Is Kim a rational actor?
I'd say for the most part, but like yeah, for the most part.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, in terms of our first contention, like, the argument that we're making isn't that, like, North Korea is going to randomly strike South Korea for no reason and that we need, like, THAAD and anti-missile systems to protect against that, even though, like, they would protect if that were to happen. The point is that, like, with, like, all of the tensions that are increasing recently, the likelihood that the U.S. or South Korea will preemptively strike North Korea is increasing. And if they preemptively strike North Korea is obviously going to attack the South, in which case we need protection.
But we have evidence stating that ABMs don't even fully protect the region that they're supposed to. So why would
we have to look at what we're comparing here. Like, even if that's totally true, which Russell's going to dispute in rebuttal, isn't it better to partially protect South Korea from nuclear weapons than to not protect them whatsoever?
Well, North Korea is not going to strike in the first place. They're only going to strike if South Korea strikes first.
Right, that's our argument. Can I ask you a question?
Okay.
So in your first contention, you talk about, like, North Korean refugees in South Korea.
Yeah.
How does, like, China and Russia trading with North Korea cause there to be a refugee crisis?
Because North Korea feels protected since China and Russia are on their side. Kim feels that he has these allies, so he feels that means he can prioritize the military over his own people, which would obviously lead to catastrophe.
I mean, Kim's always prioritized the military over his own people.
Right, but the deployment.
Why does, like, having a little bit more money or exports from China change things?
Well, it's not a little bit more money. We're talking about two major superpowers.
Okay, so say, like, they start trading with him even more. Say, like Kim Jong-un suddenly has a ton more money in the government. Why does that mean he's going to, like, commit more human rights abuses of his people, causing there to be a refugee crisis? Like, he doesn't want a refugee crisis, right? Like, it makes sense to me that if the North Korean government has more money, like, obviously since they want the people to remain on their side and not revolt or leave, he's probably going to do things like, I don't know, provide, like, some form of social service or something, like, increase propaganda that, like, makes it more likely that the people are going to like him and want to stay there. Like, I don't know why he would just randomly start increasing human rights abuses for no benefit to him.
Okay.
Do you have a question?
Yeah. How are having U.S. troops in the area a strong enough defense for nuclear weapons?
What do you mean?
Okay, so how? Oh wait.
Are you, like?
All right. So, I'm sorry.
All right, that's frustrating.
We're gonna run a little bit of that one. Starting now.
Okay, is everybody ready? Let's begin at the top of their case, where they give you this observation that we should only focus on the deployment of this THAAD anti-missile system. We say this is too small of a scope of the picture, insofar as South Korea has other anti-missile systems like the PAC-3 and Aegis defense systems, which we tell you are very important because they contribute to the layered defense that protects South Korea from any North Korean missiles. But let's go a little bit further. Their first contention talks about emboldening Kim, and they basically say that this is going to cause more refugees flowing into South Korea. The first big problem here is they concede in the first crossfire that the most important impacts in this round should be relating to a war in South Korea and South Korean lives being lost directly. This means that if we win any part of our case, we immediately outweigh their arguments. But let's look a little bit more specifically. They give you this CNBC evidence indicating that Russia is building a stronger relationship with North Korea, and they claim that this happened after the deployment of anti-missile systems. This is completely false. If you actually read the evidence they are speaking about, what their own author says is that Russia is helping North Korea in order to gain leverage over the West in areas like Syria and the Ukraine. What they want is to have more power over the United States so that when they go into those conflicts, they have more ability to strong arm the West. This means that they don't get access to any of their impacts, saying that like Kim's going to get more money and Kim's going to be more aggressive and he's going to create more of these refugee flows, insofar as Russia would be giving all this help to North Korea, regardless of whether or not we have these anti-missile systems. But even more so, they give you an Albert evidence indicating that Chinese trade with North Korea increased by 37.4% after the deployment of anti-missile systems. Again, a gross falsification of what really happened. That was in reference to a previous embargo that was a short-term thing. This was a scheduled increase in trade that was agreed upon years before the deployment of anti-missile systems. What we see in the real world is only a few weeks ago, China agreed to the strongest set of sanctions ever levied against North Korea, completely cutting off things like their fishing industry and their textile industry, as well as a 30% ban on all of the oil flowing into North Korea. What this means is that even in the world where you have anti-missile systems, you can still have China cooperate and you can still prevent the problems that they are telling you about. But let's look at their impact here. They say that when Kim gets more money, he's more emboldened to be cruel to his people, and that's bad because people are going to flee to South Korea and it's going to create these refugee crises. But there's a few problems here. First of all, if there's less money in North Korea, that means more refugees want to leave, right? If the country is in poverty and the people are like feeling all the suffering, that makes them more likely to want to leave. Giving North Korea more money would, if anything, reduce this refugee problem. But even more so, they don't prove to you why this isn't in South Korea's interest. In fact, the South Korean government themselves advocates for people to flee North Korea and come to South Korea. Insofar as that's true, they don't tell you why this is linking back to the resolution where we talk about South Korean interests. But let's go to their second contention, which looks a little bit deeper at China. First, they say that China's mad because of the anti-missile system's radar capabilities. But realize this doesn't actually matter in the context of this resolution, because the United States already has deployed anti-missile systems in Guam and Japan, whose radars can already track these Chinese nuclear weapons like they tell you about. That means in South Korea specifically, it doesn't change anything. But then they say that this is going to be perceived as containment of China. Maybe in the short term, but in the long term, the empirical evidence sides with us. Because soon of the East Asia Peace Research Institute says in the long term that China is going to get over this small bump in the road where they feel like the South Korea is being hostile towards them, just like they did when Japan deployed their anti-missile systems in the past. Sure, there was a short-term backlash. In the long term, they got over it. But let's look at their impacts. First, they tell you that this is bad for the South Korean economy because tourists are no longer going to South Korea. Realize this doesn't matter because Gibson of The Diplomat finds in 2017 that domestic travelers from South Korea are just filling this void where Chinese travelers used to go, so their economy isn't actually being hurt like they tell you about. But then they say on this impact about militarization that China is going to modernize its arsenal more rapidly, and this will cause an arms race. The problem is Colby of the Center for Strategic and International Studies finds that this deployment of anti-missile system is just a convenient political scapegoat for something that China would have done already. They already want to modernize their nuclear arsenal. They would have done that regardless of whether or not we have anti-missile systems. We say those anti-missile systems should be in the place to protect the South Koreans' lives. Thank you.
Sorry, I need my timer. Okay.
Is everybody ready? All right. I'd like to begin with a quick overview on the top of their case about why North Korea is not actually a threat. Now, this is true for 3 reasons. First, according to Business Insider in 2017, North Korea's deterrent capability would be eliminated the moment it uses a nuclear weapon, which would be akin to committing suicide. Second, though the West perceives Kim Jong-un as crazy, he is a completely rational leader focused on regime survival. Andrei Lankov of Foreign Policy states in 2017 that the Kims are the ultimate political survivors, hard-edged rationalists whose actions have always had a clear purpose, keeping the family in power. North Korea's nuclear program is defensive. Seeing him as a lunatic with nukes makes him more threatening and raises the risk of war. And finally, the collective defense already in the area is enough to deter any other kind of attack. Greg Price of Newsweek states in 2017 that 39,000 troops are stationed in Japan with naval and air bases to the north and south. South Korea has 29,000 troops, 4 armies, and one navy and 3 others. Air Force installations have long served as deterrents to the North in the years following the Korean War. Thus, any risk of harming South Korea's interests is sufficient to negate. But looking into their first contention, you can turn this because we've already explained in our second contention that deploying ABMs angers China through the perception of containment, pushing them away from the negotiating table. However, this is problematic because Anthony Kun from NPR explained in March how China is the linchpin to successful sanctions against North Korea. Chinese cooperation is the best shot at denuclearization. As Hecker of Politico writes in 2017, that Pyongyang will not consider making any concessions without peace talks. But even if talks fail, Bando of the Cato Institute finds in 2015 that the mere act of negotiating reduces North Korea's aggression and the likelihood of military conflict. Thus, if you simply negotiate with North Korea, you get rid of this nuclear threat that they pose in the area and removes the need for preemptive strikes or missile defense systems. But looking deeper into their first contention, they talk about these preemptive strikes, but note that David Kang of the University of South California finds that North Korea's mantra has always been, if the United States attacks us first, we will fight back. Thus, the only reason why North Korea would ever launch a missile is if the US or South Korea were to strike. This is a chance that they will simply not take, because why would you provoke an attack against yourself or an ally such as South Korea when the other side isn't going to attack in the first place? But further, Sophia Persio of Newsweek finds in September that 59% of South Koreans recently polled oppose the idea of a U.S. preemptive strike and are backed by President Moon, who would much rather find a diplomatic solution to the problem. Thus, launching an attack would undoubtedly anger Moon and strain the alliance that they talk about in their second contention. And finally, ABMs don't even solve the problem that nukes pose because first, THAAD won't defend against Seoul. Eric Gomez from the National Interest finds that THAAD is not able to defend Seoul from North Korean missiles because most of the capital city is just outside the 200-kilometer range of THAAD's interceptors. And third, you can turn this because defense systems only cause North Korea to look for ways to circumvent them and improve their technology. In fact, Scarborough of the Washington Times reports in 2017 that North Korea has already tested 3 types of missiles designed to subvert missile defense. And then on to their second contention about the alliance. Note that this is non-unique because the U.S. and South Korea will always maintain good relations. Mark Mannion of the Congressional Research Service in 2017 explains that South Korea is one of the United States' most important strategic and economic partners in Asia. Congress has interest in South Korea because of both security and trade interests. Whether or not that is deployed, we will continue to have a strong relationship with South Korea. And second, you can turn this because U.S. relations for South Korea would entail a trade-off in relations with 2 major countries. First is China, as we've already explained in our case, and second is Russia. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that relevant countries shouldn't use Pyongyang's acts as a pretext to increase their military presence on the Korean peninsula. He said this in April of 2016. Russia's objection is rooted in the country's role as a geopolitical adversary to the U.S. Moscow is just as reluctant as Beijing to have a powerful U.S. military radar system sitting just hundreds of miles from their territory. Considering that South Korean relations with the United States is not at risk, it's not worth the increasing tensions between them and 2 other superpowers, and thus we are proud to negate.
I'm ready for cross if you are.
All right, yeah, I'm ready. Okay. Do you have a question?
Yeah. So you give me 3 reasons. Sorry, we can. I'll wait. It's all good. Okay. We're all good?
Yeah.
Sweet. You give me 3 reasons at the top of your rebuttal, basically why North Korea wouldn't strike first, right?
Yeah.
So why does that matter if it's South Korea or the United States who's starting the war?
Okay, well, like, why would South Korea or the United States want to start a war if there's no risk of war breaking out anyway?
Because they're scared.
Of what?
They're scared of North Korea striking first. Sure, you can bring me like some esoteric policy wonks like analysis of the situation, and maybe he's correct that Kim's a rational actor, but when you have an elected politician in office who is responsible for defending the people of their country, and they see that North Korea is getting more aggressive and detonating nuclear bombs right next to their borders, people are going to get scared, right? And we say it's in those flashes when North Korea tests a missile and we're not sure whether or not it's actually going to hit us. That's when we have the risk of pressing the button and starting this war. That's why we say there's a 35% chance of war breaking out just through this like potential for an accident.
So why don't negotiations solve for this aggressive North Korea?
Why don't negotiations solve for this?
Yeah. Like, can't they just negotiate their way out
so
of it?
we've had 8 rounds of serious negotiations in the past. What have they done?
Well,
we've had the 2-party talks, the 3-party talks, 2 iterations of the 6-party talks, 5-party talks, 4-party talks. What have they done?
All right, well, they've proven that like North Korea isn't a threat insofar as they haven't actually launched a nuke yet.
They've proven that North Korea isn't a threat. So how does that reduce the chance of war? If North Korea is more aggressive than ever after we've had 8 rounds of diplomacy, how has diplomacy been reducing the threat?
Right, but aren't you just increasing aggression when you like launch a nuke at them?
What?
Like, when you have a preemptive strike, you're just making them more aggressive because...
Well, yeah, no, obviously, if we had a preemptive strike, it would cause a war. That's our point. Our argument is because these actors are scared, they're likely to start a war, like, even if you think that North Korea is rational, and in that case, we should have some sort of defense to protect the people of South Korea when the missiles start flying. But do you have a question? We've been going on this for a while.
Yeah, so on your contention about the alliance, I don't understand why the alliance would become weaker when there's already like troops and other things in the area.
Okay, well, it's about the perception of the alliance, right? Like, you can't measure the strength of the alliance. You can't say, like, my alliance is 4 strong right now. But what you can say is that if you withdrew this very important and politicized anti-missile system, what we argue is that North Korea would perceive that as the U.S. being no longer as committed to South Korea's defense as it was before. And we say this is important because historically, every time the U.S. has sort of weakened their commitment to the alliance, or at least seemed like they've been weakening, North Korea has been more and more aggressive. For example, in 2010, they destroyed a South Korean naval vessel after we saw a weakening in the alliance.
Okay. Do you have a question? Or I think that's like practical.
We have like 10 seconds left. You say that Chinese sanctions are the way to get diplomacy, right?
Yeah.
So is China sanctioning North Korea right now?
Not as much as they should be.
How so? Okay.
That's fine.
Taking prep time?
Yeah, I'm gonna take prep time. Okay, is everyone ready? All right. Let's start on this their first argument about this China and Russia alliance. Remember, none of their evidence actually says that the reason China and Russia are increasing exports to North Korea is because of the anti-missile systems. In fact, their own evidence says it's not because of that. It's for entirely separate reasons. Don't let them get access to this argument. And they try to impact like North Korea getting more money to some refugee crisis. That doesn't make any sense. If North Korea has more money, then there's probably going to be a higher quality of life within North Korea for their citizens, and they're going to be less likely to leave. There's no reason the government is going to arbitrarily increase human rights abuses because they have more money. So that argument doesn't make any sense. And also, South Korea literally advocates for North Korean refugees to come to their country. If we're talking about what's best for South Korea and they want refugees, then like this argument totally goes to our side. But then go to the reason you vote for us, which is off of shooting down missiles. They read read a bunch of arguments that say that there's no reason North Korea is going to strike first. We totally agree. Our argument is that South Korea and the US are probably going to strike first, and when that happens, North Korea is going to strike South Korea because it's right next to them. Obviously, then it's rational for North Korea to retaliate if someone attacks them, so it doesn't matter if Kim is a rational actor or not. And that's why we need to protect the people with his anti-missile systems. Then, they try to turn this argument by saying that the anti-missile systems anger China and they're less likely to sanction them. But they're literally sanctioning North Korea now with the strongest sanctions they've ever done. Their response is totally irrelevant. Then, they read the Kang evidence that says that if the US or South Korea strikes, North Korea is going to attack back. Obviously, that's our argument. They say, why would the US attack if they know the North would retaliate? Remember, our Collinson evidence is really key. It says that North Korea is getting closer to being able to hit the US with a missile. Obviously, if you read the news, you know that the US government really thinks North Korea is going to attack us first. So it doesn't matter what the reality is. The perception in the US is that they're going to strike. And at this point, extend the Sejong evidence, which says that even if the anti-missile systems just shoot down one missile, it would save 340,000 lives. That's infinitely better than not having any anti-missile systems.
We'll start out. Alright, stop prep. The other way.
Okay. So starting with their case, North Korea is not a threat because North Korea launching any missiles would be akin to suicide. Kim is rational. He doesn't want his regime to crumble, and attacking would get rid of his deterrent capability. Second, preemptive strikes don't make sense because, first of all, our Kang evidence says that North Korea is not going to attack first. They concede to this, and also the U.S. government themselves, they say that North Korea is not going to attack first. So why are we going to provoke an attack with a preemptive strike? Second, ABMs cause North Korea to find ways to circumvent the systems, and so they just don't. They're just not effective. And we also say that can't even protect Seoul because it's not in the range. Third, alliance is bad because we turn this saying that the U.S. South Korea alliance with THAAD entails a trade-off with Russia and China relations, and because they feel contained by the ABMs. So we extend that in the off on our case. China feels contained right now because of the presence of the missile defense systems and the radar systems. The impacts are happening right now. We can already see that. And with the arms race, China is multiplying their arms production, which is leading to other countries like Japan and South Korea and Vietnam to increase their weapons production, which will in the end lead to arms race and war. And then we win on time frame because again, the arms race is happening right now, the refugee crisis is happening right now, and also we save the lives of everyone impacted by an arms race, thus we win on scope. For these reasons, we could negate.
Are you ready for Grand Cross?
Yeah. I have a question.
Yeah.
You say that like Japan and Vietnam are building up arms and there's gonna have an arms race in the region, right?
Yeah.
So are Japan and Vietnam gonna go to war?
They might.
Why would they want to go to war? Just because I have a gun, why do I want to like shoot
I
something?
mean, our rider evidence says that like when you have like an arms race in the area, it increases the probability of like war by 331%. And even if it's not that, like a Harvard.
Arms races between like traditional rivals.
Rider evidence, if you read the evidence, the 330% increase in war, it's saying that when there's an arms race between two countries that are already rivals and already hate each other, there's an increase in the chance of war.
Sure, I mean, even
like,
if you
very
don't buy
slightly.
that, like our Harvard evidence says that like that's going to bring like instability to the area because these other countries are starting to multiply their
You're not
arms.
telling me why that's bad.
You're telling me that instability is good?
No, I'm not
No,
telling you
but
instability.
why-
I'm saying
why
why
is-
does it cause instability?
Why does it cause instability?
why
Because they're
does
like
it
building up
inherently
their
have an
arms.
Why does it inherently cause war if they're not already enemies? Like, the US has nuclear weapons, like, Israel has nuclear weapons. Like, we're friends, so we're not gonna nuke each other.
All right, but like are all countries in East Asia friends?
I mean, Japan and Vietnam, like,
Give me an
they have
example.
no reason to
Give
go
me
to
an
war.
example of two countries in East Asia that are building up arms because of anti-missile systems and are going to go to war because they built up arms.
Like, like China and like anyone really.
So China's just like really thirsty to go to war. They'll fight anyone.
Yup. That's what we are.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So on your preemptive strikes argument.
Yeah.
So like I still don't understand like why are countries scared if like you've conceded that like that North Korea is not gonna launch an attack first, right? Like,
Okay,
you said that.
it's not about like what's actually going to happen, because like
What?
it's about what the U.S. Like, I mean, it's
Right,
about
but
what the
people
U.S.
in the
thinks is going to
government
happen.
are, like,
Can I ask you a
they are-
question really quick? Would you say that like right now the U.S. government is at least decently worried that North Korea is going to attack us?
Not really.
So why is everyone in this
Wait.
administration saying we're going to launch fire and fury against
That's
North
only
Korea?
all we
Trump.
talk
Actually,
about.
first of all, that's only Trump. Second of all,
Why are
it's
all of our
Trump's literally
military
the worst
planners
source ever.
building up military assets in the region?
Why or what?
Why are the military planners saying they're moving assets to the
Like,
region?
I would say regardless of if North Korea is actually going to attack, like the U.S. government really thinks that they are. So there's a decent chance that they'll attack, especially if, like your evidence says, by early 2018, North Korea develops the ability to directly attack the U.S.
And directly deliver a nuke to the mainland U.S., which is not just something that Trump's been saying. Presidents since Clinton have been saying that we will never allow North Korea to get an ICBM that will hit the United States with a nuke. This is not just like, oh, like Trump's Trump. Like, this is established in U.S. foreign policy that is a line in the sand.
Okay, that's fine.
We'll run the rest of our time. Okay. Is everyone ready? Let's talk about missile defense.
They say Kim's never going to strike first. Fine. An elected politician who is feeling pressure when their constituents feel unsafe in the face of a nuclear bomb is not the same as a policy wonk sitting in their office saying, I think North Korea is a rational actor. Even a casual observer looking at the news today can very clearly see that the United States government is very concerned about the possibility of a North Korean strike, which is especially reinforced by the fact that they're going to get the capability to deliver a nuke to the mainland United States in early 2018, which is a line in the sand that the U.S. has established for decades and decades. This is why the Collinson evidence indicates that there is a large chance that the United States will launch a preemptive strike. And moreover, we tell you there's a 35% chance of war breaking out right now. They never respond to that from our case. But they say that even if this war started, anti-missile systems wouldn't help because North Korea might be able to circumvent some of the interceptions. Sure, maybe they can circumvent one or two, but we say even if we can only shoot down a single missile out of North Korea's thousands and thousands of missiles, just one saves 340,000 South Korean lives as per the Sejong evidence, which they again don't respond to. This is the very clearest way where South Korean people get hurt when you vote negative. Let's talk about their side of this debate. It really doesn't make any sense. They say China is mad because they're being contained. What they ignore is the soon evidence which says in the long term they are going to get over this bump in the road in relations, just like they did when Japan deployed anti-missile systems and China said they had the same worries. But they say this is very bad because China is modernizing its nuclear arsenal. The big problem here is they ignore the Colby evidence which indicates that they would have done this even without anti-missile systems, and this is just a convenient political scapegoat for China to say that, oh, this is the reason why we're doing it, when in reality, they would have done it regardless. But even if you believe that this arms race happens, they don't prove to you why it is ever bad. They say Japan and Vietnam are going to build up weapons. Why does that matter? They have to prove to you that these countries want to go to war. We say the only flashpoint in the region is the North Korean crisis, and the only way to prevent that from causing hundreds of thousands of deaths is to have anti-missile systems. Thank you.
We'll take the rest of our prep. I think that's time. Okay, I'll start on their case and then move on to ours and then do some weighing. Is everyone ready? All right, so starting on their case, the biggest thing is that they conceded that North Korea is never going to attack first and launch first. But then they try to say that politicians think differently than policy people. But the reason why politicians were elected into office is because they can assess the situation and see whether there's an actual risk. And the fact is there's no risk here. If even these two seniors can see that there's no risk of North Korea attacking first, I'm sure the U.S. government can see that as well, which means that they will never launch a preemptive strike. Because if there's no reason that North Korea is going to attack in the first place, why would you launch an attack that you can't even fully protect South Korea from? It just doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, extend our turn that says that ABMs cause North Korea to try to come up with ways to circumvent this defense system. So you're never going to be able to stop all the nukes from hitting the South Korean people. So a preemptive strike would undoubtedly just kill South Korean citizens for no reason. And then moving on to our side of the case, they try to tell you that containment is not going to happen in the long term, but that doesn't even matter because it's happening right now. Meaning you have to solve for the problem right now. And then they try to tell you that they use that as a scapegoat. It doesn't matter what they use as a scapegoat because it's already happened. That has caused this arms race. So that is the problem. So if you and then they say that our arms race isn't a tangible impact, but it is because we say that it increases instability in the area. That's our Harvard evidence, and it also increases the probability of war. And even if they're on friendly terms now, the people in East Asia, doesn't mean that it's always going to stay that way. And we outweigh on time frame because it's happening right now. So it's a problem that materializes now rather than their evidence, such that their impact, which we don't even know when that's going to happen. And we outweigh on scope because an arms race affects all of Asia, not just one little area, and thus we urge you to negate.
In this debate, we saw that the crossfires tried to get at the root issues, the key links, the things that led to the impacts both sides are trying to claim. The pro team is much more experienced and really dominated the crossfires, but judges cannot vote on who looks like they are winning, only on an evaluation of the arguments that the teams use at the end of the round to say that they win. The rebuttals tried to go down the line by line and respond to each claim in the other team's case. This is why it is so important for judges to flow down in columns, so you can line up, literally match the arguments that the rebuttals are making to the arguments from the other team's cases. These were both good rebuttals that tried to show where their case outweighed or was more important while running down the other team's flow. Then we saw the summaries try to pick and choose the key arguments in the debate. These are really hard speeches because there are 16 minutes to summarize in just 2. In this debate, both summaries were a little scattered. Sometimes you see a summary step away from the flow and identify key voting issues, trying to connect the points of clash or contention between the two cases. These summaries were both heavy on the pro flow, which is a weak point for either team, but something you'd like to see Khan pick up on since they were speaking second. You'd also like to see more connection between the Khan's attempt to use diplomacy in the rebuttal and second crossfire and the use of that argument in summary. In final focus, Pro argues that a preemptive strike is likely and would cause a war, but missile defense could save lives. On the other hand, they argue that losing Chinese cooperation isn't a big deal, basically that Khan's impacts either won't happen or would happen either way, with or without missile defense. Khan's final focus, unfortunately for them, follows the same voting issues. This is usually a mistake because it allows the Pro team to set the terms for the debate, which they will always do in a way that is favorable to them. Based on the team's final focuses, the only questions to vote on are 1. Whether a preemptive strike is likely, 2. Whether missile defense causes other sources of conflict by angering China, and, if I answer yes to both of those questions, 3. Which of them matters more to South Korean interests. Pro effectively argues that a preemptive strike is a possibility. Both sides agree that a preemptive strike is the only way North Korea launches missiles, and while the effectiveness of missile defense as a whole is disputed, the fact that it does save lives is not. This gives a clear reason to vote pro. While I see some reason to fear that China's response to THAAD causes generalized problems in Asia, Pro does a good job extending arguments that Khan never replied to on this point, and Pro's impacts are much more directly contextualized to South Korea. Therefore, Pro wins the debate.